Thanks, Devesh, for the introduction. So I'm just going to start off with a case which was something that piqued my interest. This is way back in 2006 when kummel wasn't very well discussed in most of our forums. And this guy came from Zambia with a prostate issue, and when positioning on the table for doing his TURP, he's got severe back pain and he was not able to stand, got severe pain radiating to the legs. The X-ray at that time showed this benign-looking L2 fracture. The MRI also didn't show much. There was a slight inferior end plate fracture of the L2 and slight canal compromise. And then we thought of doing these standing X-rays then. I mean, now it's become routine that we do them, but in those days it wasn't that common. And it showed a severe collapse of the L2. And then we went on to do an open vertebroplasty with stabilization. And as you all know, I do knee replacements also. He went on to then get his knee replaced with me. There was another quick case about a dermatologist who's also had a knee replacements done by me. She had a fall in the bathroom, and she got this benign-looking fracture D12. Got the MRIs done, and it looked very well like a decent case for. There wasn't much of a cleft seen. Looked like a good case for vertebroplasty, not responding to conservative management. Being a doctor, she wanted to get back to work. So we did the standard vertebroplasty. There was a little bit of a backtracking of cement, as you can see there. But other than that, it looked well done. But she got absolutely no pain relief. So we got the X-rays done in sitting and supine views, which showed that there was what we know as intervertebral instability now. And then we counseled her and then went ahead and did a additional short segment fixation. So this post-intervertebral instability is one of the issues that we have to deal with. So vertebroplasty is, what I'm trying to say, is not the end-all solution for a lot of things. They're very selective cases that we should do vertebroplasty in and expect certain results. So there's cases like this also where you can see the cement migration even after doing a vertebroplasty. This is like a pincer phenomenon, which probably needs something in addition. So percutaneous vertebroplasty is indicated for the treatment of vertebral fractures which are refractory to medical and conservative treatment. So the essential indications are those that are not responding to your medical treatment that Agnivesh spoke about for 3 to 6 weeks, or patients demanding an active lifestyle. I've had people coming in earlier saying that they want to get better vertebroplasty. They're well informed. If that can help me, I want to do it fast. Metastatic fractures, particularly the osteolytic ones, hemangiomas. So these are the typical fractures that you can see that look pretty much benign, not responding to conservative fractures, conservative management. The ideal indication for vertebroplasty is a standalone vertebroplasty is a stable, non-compressile fracture without neurological deficit, without Kummel's disease. The presence of Kummel's disease or phenomenon usually indicates an instability and the need for probably additional surgery. Sugita, based on his X-ray classification, this had these 6 groups with type 1 being normal. The topmost, the concave and the dented type, usually have good prognosis with vertebroplasty. The lower 3, which is the swollen, the projectile, and the bow-shaped ones, tend to have a poor prognosis. Even the German Society for Orthopaedics and Trauma came up with this classification for osteoporotic fractures, depending on the extent of the injury, wherein the OF osteoporotic fracture 1, 2, and probably 3 could respond to standalone vertebroplasty. The type 4 with the vertebra plana, the pincer type, and the instability usually do require some instrumentation along with it. So contraindications for vertebral augmentation are obviously healed fractures, asymptomatic stable fractures, because if this patient has pain, you have to rule out other causes of pain. It could not be a vertebroplasty patient. Allergy to PMMA could be a relative contraindication. Patients on anticoagulation therapy, where there's obvious infection on epidural abscess. If a patient has a neurological deficit at the same level of the fracture, that becomes another contraindication for vertebral augmentation. Patients with neurological deficit can be treated with vertebroplasty, but this may require a sort of a mini hemilaminotomy with a controlled vertebroplasty along with adjacent screw level fixation, screws at the adjacent levels. The relative contraindications are a significant compromise of the spinal canal, back pain for more than 1 year, in which again, in case we need to rule out other causes of back pain, vertebra plana, when there's tumor extension to the epidural space. Another contraindication is the inability to lie, relative contraindication is the inability to lie down prone. So if you look at the natural course of the disease, most of the patients, or 70% will stabilize by themselves without any complications, and they will return to a normal function. There are only 30% which patients which ultimately may result in collapse, resulting in then instability, pain, deformity, and also neurological compromise. So essentially, when you look at these patients, there are 4 groups. The ones which are pain, which are not able to follow conservative treatment, or they fail conservative treatment. There are patients who have pain without instability, but with a small cleft formation. Then there are patients which have neurodeficit with instability and kummels, and there are patients who have neurodeficit with instability and without the kummels. A brief word about kummels. It was described by this German physician Hermann Kummel in 1891. Basically, it's the AV and pseudarthrosis or non-union of the vertebral body. Usually, it happens in osteoporotic compression fractures. The usual causes of AV and like alcohol, steroids, smoking, radiation predispose them to having this fluid phenomenon. It usually happens at the dorsal lumbar junction, and it's associated with the intravertebral cleft that you see on the scans or on the X-rays. And they're very characteristic appearance on the MRI, maybe be fluid or gas. So these pictures on the left, the one showing with the classical kummels phenomenon, and this other picture on the right, the one on the left is a stir-weighted image, and the one on the right is a T2-weighted image, showing the intervertebral cleft adjacent to the fracture. So the typical history is that the patients are usually doing well with conservative management, and then instead of getting better, they start deteriorating. They're comfortable sleeping, but they have a lot of pain getting up from the supine position or sitting up in bed. And they can usually be diagnosed by the supine lateral and sitting X-rays, which show a change in the angle of kyphosis. CT scans could be useful in certain cases, though we generally tend to do MRIs to detect where the defect is, whether it's anteriorly, posteriorly, or towards the end plate. So this is like a typical anterior opening defect that you see. So post-vertebroplasty for kummels, there's a higher incidence of 3 fractures noted, hence in 2 years. Hence, the medical treatment that Agnivesh spoke about is of paramount importance. It's just not your process, it's the medical management, since osteoporosis is a medical disease. The inferior kummels that have the gas or the fluid formation towards the inferior end plates have a higher tendency to refracture. And the incidence of cement leakage is actually unknown. So only if you have these anterior opening ones, you have to be careful. So the technique, this can be done, vertebroplasty can be done in the OT under sedation or in the CT scan area. I usually do it in the OT. The patient should be cooperative if you're going to do it under sedation, and they should be able to lie down, maintaining their prone position for the duration of the procedure and able to maintain the oxygenation. Under GA, it can always be done because you're rest assured that the patient will not move when you have the stability. It's actually very comforting to do it under GA, but you have to be careful because you can't watch the patient's neurology. You have to be careful about the cement leaking posteriorly or cement embolization. You keep the patient as straight as possible and probably even extend his back if it's possible to help open up the vertebra. I usually tend to use 2 C-arms if I can, if it's available, because it's safer, time-saving, and gives more consistent results. You also need a good C-arm technician. A lot of OTs have good C-arms but poor technicians, and this can really ruin your day if you have somebody who can't show you good images. Tend to use proper cement. I generally don't use our cement that we use for knee replacement, but that tends to become harder when it's mobilized. You need to add a little bit of radio-opaque material like barium sulfate. These ready-made vertebroplasty cements are usually better, and when they harden, they don't become completely hard. That probably helps adjacent level fractures, and that's probably one of the most, according to me, the area that we're deficient is in finding the ideal cement, which will be of low viscosity, allow flow, and ultimately get incorporated and not stand out like a foreign body in the vertebra. You can use either a single portal or a biportal, and you can do one level or multi-level fixations. I usually do a uniportal fixation, vertebroplasty. So these are just some images of the C-arms, how you position them, one from the top in the C, and the other one can come either from the top or from the bottom, depending where you are. Usually you need to stand on a stool because the table height has to be raised, and you put your screens on one side so you can see both the screens. So I don't use any fancy cement injection device. I know you get these ones which control, which you can turn and inject slowly. I generally mix the cement in a bowl, empty it out into a 20 cc syringe, and then put it in either 1 cc or 2 cc syringes. I prefer a lower lock syringe, which can lock into the hook needle, which allows no air leak and allows a more controlled injection. You can put the monomer on ice if you need more time, but usually if you're doing a single level, there's more than adequate time. Don't use a hammer while selecting my entry point. I generally use my hand. I just enter with force. Don't use a hammer unless the needle tends to slip off the pedicle, in which case I may use just a mallet at the entry point. You enter in a controlled manner like you do with your pedicle screws, and avoid multiple passes because these passes can then form trails along which the cement can then leak. I use a shorter Jamshidi or hook needle because you need space on the top. Your C-arm hanging on your, giving you enough space. We use a longer hook needle. You generally don't get enough space to put your hand in to inject. You inject slowly. If you're injecting and using only one C-arm, use the lateral film to watch for cement leakage. Often you get these air locks, which is air getting trapped in the canal. So you have to keep using these stillets to clear it out. Make sure that the cement is filled in the syringe adequately and there's no air trapped in the syringe. And when you're injecting, you have these marks on the hook needle, which you can use to monitor that you're not pushing the needle deeper inside when you're injecting. So keep one hand below to stabilize the needle, and with the other hand, you can inject. After they finish injecting the cement, don't be in a hurry to remove the needle. Rotate the needle in the body to prevent it from adhering to the cement. And after it's about 11 to 13 minutes, when it's not running, you can remove the needle. How much cement do you need to inject? Usually in the dorsal spine, about 2 to 3 ml is adequate. And the lumbar spine, you can go from 4 to 5. The volume injected does not dictate the pain relief. This is one condition where you don't need to get greedy. You've seen people getting neurological deficits when they inject too much cement. However, there's some data that suggests that patients with clefts, inadequate filling may result in what is the post-vertebroplasty instability because there's not adequate fill. So you also use Omnipack. I tend to use dilute Omnipack because I don't want that Omnipack to remain inside and get the cement dye and the contrast getting confused with each other. If there is a cement of epidural leak of the Omnipack, it's not a contraindication, but just you have to be careful that you go in a little bit late and be careful to watch for the patient's saturation. Tell the anesthetist to watch for that. In a patient without a cleft, you need to go a little early because the bone tends to be a little bit harder. But patients who are having the intervertebral cleft or kummels, they fill up easy, so you can go a little bit late. So this is like a picture of the complications that can occur: the epidural cement leaking anteriorly and the cement leaking posteriorly. Plan your projection depending on where you're targeting it. If your phenomenon is more inferiorly or your defect is more inferiorly.
Nirad, can you sum up fast? We are running a little late.
Yeah. These are quick pictures showing where your needle should be positioned. I think most of us know that when you're starting on the left side, it should be in the 10 o'clock position, on the right from the 2 o'clock position. And the location of the needle should be in the pedicle till the time it reaches the posterior wall of the pedicle of the vertebral body. If you cross that, then your trajectory is wrong. So these are the markers showing where your needle should be. And when you're finally in the vertebral body, it should be about 2/3 along the way, and it should not cross the midline. Also, when you're putting on the C-arm should be positioned at the spinous process should be right in the center. Both the pedicles should be clearly visible, and they should be towards the superior end plate. So this has to be said before you start your procedure. Just a quick example of a vertebroplasty patient with not significant collapse. And so the take-home message is the indication for isolated vertebroplasty is limited to certain fractures only. These fractures also have a chance of getting better when treated conservatively. Intervertebral clefts or the kummels indicate potential instability and may need a short segment stabilization in addition. Medical management, though, remains of utmost importance. And this may never be the end. So you always have the patient has to be communicated with that osteoporosis is an ongoing disease and there could be associated complication, either adjacent ligamental fractures or associated kyphosis. The idea is to get the vertebroplasty in a way like this so the patient can be happy. Thank you.